Project 1065, Chapter 53, The Wolf Pack. The paper on Melker's desk was a telegram from the Nazi High Command. It was dated several weeks ago, just after the German defeat at Stalingrad. Under Air Professor Dr. Major Melker's name and home address, it said, "I regret to inform you that your son, Unteroffizier Jürgen Melker, killed in glorious service to fatherland on 1st February during strategic withdrawal of forces from Stalingrad. Heil Hitler." So that explained it. Why Air Professor Dr. Major Melker had been so angry these past weeks. Why he'd been letting his doubts about Hitler and the war creep into his lessons. His son had died at Stalingrad. Strategic withdrawal. Ha! Just like protective custody, strategic withdrawal was code. It meant we ran away like cowards. Sergeant Jürgen Melker had died running away from the Russians and with the 6th Army the day before the rest of his comrades just gave up and surrendered. Fritz finally showed up for class, talking and laughing with another SRD boy named Max. I called Fritz over. "Take a look. I found something that explains why Air Professor Dr. Major Melker has been so touchy lately." "He's been touchy because he's a doddering old man who serves no purpose to the war effort," Fritz said. I recoiled a bit from the strength of Fritz's reaction. He'd never been so hateful before. "We have no use for these clever monks in their quiet cells," Max said, spouting overblown propaganda from our weekly meetings. "The future will not be won with essays and tests. It will be won with fists and steel." Fritz nodded in sour agreement. "No, listen," I tried to tell them, but Air Professor Dr. Major Melker walked in just then. I dropped the telegram and hurried away to my desk. "Sit down and shut up, you brats," Melker said. Fritz slid into the seat beside mine. Ever since we put on the SRD uniform, no one had tried to make him sit elsewhere. He sat ramrod straight, eyes forward. He didn't seem to want to talk to me these days, and less than a month ago he'd been following me around like a puppy. "Fritz, what have you been up to these few days?" I whispered. "You're never at home in the mornings or after school, and you don't come to the Hitler Youth meetings anymore. What's the special team Trumbauer put you on?" "It's a science team," Fritz said. In the desk behind Fritz, Max snickered like he was in on the joke. And science team had to be a joke. The only science Hitler Youth ever learned was how to tell a Jew from an Aryan and how to calculate the money wasted taking care of mentally handicapped people. I waited for Fritz to tell me the truth, but that appeared to be all he was going to say about it. I smoldered. What was up with Fritz all of a sudden? It was as though we were suddenly not friends anymore. Air Professor Dr. Major Melker walked up and down the row of desks, handing back graded papers. He put one on Fritz's desk. Fritz reached down slowly and flicked it away. The paper fluttered off his desk and landed on the floor at Air Professor Dr. Major Melker's feet. "Pick that up at once," Melker said. "No," Fritz said. "You pick it up." The room got deathly quiet, and a cold pit opened up in my stomach. Fritz didn't know what happened to Melker's son. He was going to push him too far. Air Professor Dr. Major Melker's face reddened. "I will do no such thing. Pick up that paper at once, young man, or I will mark this incident down in your Nazi Party record book." Fritz slowly got up from his desk. The entire room was silent, watching. "No," Fritz said again. His voice was cool, collected, the direct opposite of Air Professor Dr. Major Melker's nervous spluttering. "I told you once to pick it up," Fritz said. "I won't tell you again." I couldn't believe Fritz. What was he doing? Air Professor Dr. Major Melker shook like he was about to explode. He raised a hand to give Fritz a sharp blow with the back of his hand, but suddenly Max stood up behind Fritz. Then 2 other SRD boys in the room, the junior Gestapo, all staring with cold, dead eyes at Air Professor Dr. Major Melker. Melker stood frozen, hands still raised, eyes bulging in a mix of indignation and horror. Fritz glanced at me. I was the only SRD boy not standing, not challenging Melker. I stood up. I had to. I couldn't sit while the other SRD boys stood. Otherwise, I ran the risk of blowing my cover. Air Professor Dr. Major Melker's bushy eyebrows knitted together in anger, and he opened his mouth to say something, but what we heard instead was the howl of the air raid siren. The Americans were at it again. We had to get to the shelters. Fritz stepped away from his desk, deliberately walking, not running, past Air Professor Dr. Major Melker to the door. The other Hitler Youth boys did the same, filing past him in a silent procession of unexpressed violence. Melker stood rooted to the spot, looking suddenly much more frail and old than his actual years. I let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding and ran to my air raid station. Whatever it was Fritz was doing before and after school for the SRD with Max, it was changing him. He was harder now, colder, meaner. He never would have talked back to Air Professor Dr. Major Melker like that before, and he never would have lied to me. And if Fritz wasn't going to tell me the truth about what he was doing, for SS Obersturmführer Trumbauer, I was just going to have to find it out on my own.